Hello, and welcome to Fraud Talk, the ACFE's monthly podcast. I'm John Duffley, the ACFE's Communications Director. In this episode, I talked to Jim McConnell, a certified fraud examiner and 25-year veteran of the ACFE, whose work has taken him to the forefront of an emerging and growing threat: fraudulent groups that are taking advantage of job seekers by using fake job postings to lure them into a false sense of hope and then take advantage of them through financial gain or obtaining personally identifiable information. In our conversation, Jim discusses this rising issue of applicant fraud and hiring violations, highlighting the unique challenges faced by job seekers in today's market. He also talks about the role of fraud examiners in identifying and mitigating these risks, the tactics used by scammers, and the importance of vigilance among job seekers. Our discussion also covers proactive measures that companies can take to protect their brand and the steps individuals should follow if they fall victim to fraud.
Every fraud case has consequences, but how quickly you uncover and resolve it depends on the tools you use. Case IQ is the investigation management platform built for corporate fraud teams. From intake to resolution, streamline your workflow, protect sensitive data, and close cases faster with confidence. Visit caseiq.com/fraud talk and take control of your investigations today. And now, back to this month's episode of Fraud Talk.
All right, Jim, appreciate you taking some time today. We were getting started before this, talking a little bit, so I appreciate you setting some time aside. Very busy these days. But to kind of get started, the first thing I wanted to ask you a little bit on this honestly interesting topic. I know you talked about definitely recently emerging, but how did you get started investigating hiring violations and like this notion of applicant fraud?
Sure. It goes back to my in my career when I would work with a lot of supply chain folks and suppliers, and we would have an investigation in the corporate world, and literally they would come up and say, "Hey, are we doing background checks right? Are we doing due diligence right?" And so I thought about, now that I've gone through this process here, of wow, we went back that far and we were still having those challenges, and I still get those questions in 2025 that people are still struggling with background checks and due diligence type of work on their suppliers and employees. And then probably about 6 months ago, I just started getting, I don't know, half irritated, half excited about some of the challenges that I was seeing coming through various job seeker environments that were out there around these frauds and scams that we're trying. And it started out with a message here and a text here, et cetera. And when I started to really track it, it kind of turned into that proverbial book of an investigation. I'm like, let me just use my investigative skills to start this. And once we started doing that, people started reaching out to me. Is this a scam? Is this a problem? And it was more than just, hey, I got a little text about my UPS package. It started being really serious and people saying, why are they going after us? And that started to really formalize this into both an investigation, reaching out to the platforms that support job seekers, and then ultimately a class that I've now developed.
We were talking before this. I mean, even just in the last week, I'd received a text message from somebody claiming to have job opportunities, reaching out on WhatsApp. It certainly is a unique, I think, thing that, especially with job seekers kind of getting into like desperate mode, looking for work. So we'll get into some of the nuance of that. But I guess out of curiosity, given the breadth of these scams, obviously there are a lot yet to be revealed. How would you rate, if a job seeker is going into the market today, obviously with web-based platforms, LinkedIn, Indeed being, ground zero for people to go look for a job in some of these portals, and how important they are. How would you rate the job market today, given that?
I think it is, there's a lot of stress in this. If we think about the fraud triangle, going back to Fraud 101, opportunity rationalization type of things. And now you've got this pressure. So now you got the pressure on kind of the victim side that we don't normally have into other types of fraud that impacts an individual. And so they're impacted professionally and they're impacted personally. And that makes it new and unique to me. And so I think in this, we have started to see with that pressure, as they say, if you're looking for a job, your full-time job is looking for a job. And so think about that. If your full-time job, you're the CEO of your job-seeking role, well, guess what? Could you be impacted by scammers and fraudsters? Why are you any different, kind of thing? So the added-on pressure to serve your family and your finances, et cetera, just kind of makes it even that much harder. And thus, we're more vulnerable. We're not thinking about it. Why would anybody go after me as a job seeker? And the fraud triangle continues to work well from the suspect side.
Yeah, we'll get into a little bit about reading some of your materials before this, some of those red flags, things that, the tools of a fraudulent recruiter. But before we do, one of the things I thought was really interesting, like you said, there's this pressure on job applicants to find an opportunity. And you had included some notes from a study from some of the top auto appliers in the industry. And again, these are platforms that claim to put you out there, throw your resume into a ton of different opportunities. I had some notes from it, from the study of 23 of the top appliers. Many of them violated rules of job boards, had very generic privacy statements. Many of them claimed to be from companies, but had no compliance information, no information how to contact company leadership. So I was curious if you could talk a little bit about these like auto appliers, what they do, what job seekers should do when they're encountering one of these sites and even receiving outreach from somebody claiming to be from them, saying, they're offering support. Going back to your point, the pressure's there and somebody's offering this branch of, hey, we'll put you in front of a ton of companies. Chances are it could be, like you said, grounds for fraud.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're always looking for tools. We don't want to rewrite our resume for every job that we have out there. We want to take advantage of new tools like AI. We're, again, under pressure. The HR folks are under pressure. They're getting, the average job sometimes in certain industries right now are getting 400 applicants in just a few days of posting it. So on the job seeker side, they're going, hey, how can I speed these things up? How can I get up on the top of that stack of 400 easier? How can I be recognized? Well, there's a lot of techniques in classic job seeking side, but these auto appliers are going, hey, we can help. And, for a small fee, and of course that fee is financial and that fee is your information, et cetera. But yes, we looked at 23 of those, just the big ones that were out there. And wow, they are, they want your information. They want a lot of your information. And things like saying, we will apply to 10 jobs for you, customize each of those position of your resume for each of those 10 for a small fee per day. Well, if you think about doing that manually, that's pretty difficult and, again, stressful type thing. So I want to apply to 10 jobs today. That's a goal. And now I got to go and redo my resume, redo my CV on that. Well, some of them are claiming 100 jobs a day or 100 jobs a week. Well, that number sounds great, and it sounds nice that I'm not going to have to type in those crazy forms because every company's using a different form and answering different questions. Well, there's nothing good comes out of that. And so with that, the fraudulent job seeker is using these against the companies, but also these folks are saying, we can make it easy for you. They're taking your personal information. They are going to use that for nefarious purposes. They are, of course, looking for money. And I have seen no guarantee of any compliance, anything. And in fact, when you see no compliance attestations from any of these folks, the opposite, in my mind, comes into play is they're using this for nefarious purposes.
It's really, again, it's such like a vulnerable population that you see that opportunity there. It's hard to turn away from. They're going to put you at the top of the list.
I talked to one company, one of the appliers, just trying to get real information from them. And they were adamant about their world. And when I started challenging them with good old-fashioned fraud examiner questions, they literally started using certain words to me and shut down the conversation. So if they were supposedly one of the top professional ones out there, they did not want to talk to me after I started asking some challenging questions.
So when it comes to not only necessarily these auto appliers, but even anybody who may be just, chumming the water, if you will, throwing some fake applications out there or fake opportunities. What are some of the most common ways that they're pulling in these prospective candidates, nurturing that relationship, either language of the job posting, even after they make contact? What are some of the things that they're doing that, again, some of them I'm sure are old hat, but maybe even some of the newer things they're trying to do to get you to take that action with them?
Sure, they're going to play off of our feelings that you look great, your resume looks great, you are perfect for our operation. The most common one is we've looked at your resume and your online profile, and you are perfect for a new project for my boss. So they act as an intermediary. But they're going to play off of the emotions of this first, because again, they want to get the hook to get you in to provide them information. And it might start with just a resume. And you think, well, my resume is almost close to public. But guess what? They're going to start to add on. They're going to build that trust with you, as a classic fraudster will do. And that will grow in from there to lots of other schemes that we'll do. And of course, ultimately getting you to either spend money, get more contacts from you, use your relationships to target other peers of yours, and of course, your personally identifiable information.
Yeah, I know, because again, going through some of your material before, things like social engineering, well established, easy way to kind of, get under your skin. Fake descriptions, generic websites. One of the things that you'd mentioned that I thought was really interesting, especially with LinkedIn being the professional network, but this notion of comment poisoning and having the spam outreach, offering opportunities, how often or are you seeing these kinds of, maybe direct outreach? I mean, even in a public space like that, reaching out to you on LinkedIn and just dropping a comment, hey, reach out to me, I have an opportunity.
I personally, in my educational materials are almost 100% things they've targeted me. So, and I've validated it with other victims in other areas. So I'm getting the comment poison. Let me explain that for the audience. Is you've got a message going back and forth between you and some other parties. You are having a good conversation about, traveling to a particular conference or something like that. And right in the middle of that, they will comment on you and say, hey, Billy Bob, how are you? We have a great project for you. So they're inserting themselves right into that comment thread with a job offer or opportunity right there. So that's called comment poisoning, because they're poisoning the thread about going to some conference and jumping in there. And of course, they want you to jump offline to DMs or other tools, chat tools, etc., mainly WhatsApp. And again, we're not picking on those tools or anything like that, other than these platforms, but they will jump into that. And so that's one way. They, of course, will direct message you. Again, direct message is going to be less public. So they're going to build trust that way. Emails, etc. So DMs, in other words, instant messages, DMs, comment poisoning, and direct email. All three of those, they're going to come after it. And I get probably, on the direct message one is my most common, I probably get a couple of those a day.
Wow. Like I said, I even just prepping for our conversation today, I had a couple of different people tell me, text message, again, your information's on LinkedIn, right? You want to connect, you want to do it with well-intentioned connection, leaves you like kind of hanging out for these opportunities for people to, like you said, just interject, just pop out, and maybe it falls on deaf ears. Maybe it does find somebody who has been in the 6th, 8th, 10th month of their job search, and it seems like a good idea to reach back and start a conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's, again, as the time goes on, that pressure increases. But I encourage folks to, as I say in my class, trust a little bit less. The example is, we all got that remote on our car, and we hit the button to lock the door. But why do we hit it the second time? Because we want to hear the lights go on. We want to hear the beep, the horn go off, because we don't trust that thing worked. So I just want people in these things that in this stressful time, trust a little bit less. If you see something from a particular company, go out to the company's direct website. If you see it, Acme Brick Company, The guys talking about that, go out to that. Again, HR recruiters, legitimate HR recruiters are going to be transparent. They're going to talk about who they work for. They're going to give a legitimate website. They're going to have phone numbers that you can call back to. They're going to have LinkedIn profiles. Those things are normal. So when you see the abnormal, I see LinkedIn, I see these fraudulent recruiters all the time where, a recruiter's there to recruit people, to connect people. When you go out to a recruiter's LinkedIn profile and they have, 25 followers and they've been in the recruitment business for 10 years, does that math add up? I don't think so.
Yeah, that actually you kind of start into my next question. This idea of some of these red flags, um, phishing emails, payment scam. I mean, there's lots of things that a fraud examiner might notice, but somebody who maybe is newer, or like you said, as that pressure starts to build, what are some things that some of these job postings or even the outreach that you can start to pull the thread a little bit and see, like you said, start to reach out, look in the right places. What are some other things that job seekers can do as they're vetting some of these ideas and opportunities?
Sure. And of course, you're vetting the person and vetting the company that's reaching out to you. And we'll have a resource that we'll put on at the end that digs into a lot more of these actual things that you can look out for. So the first thing is their followers or the size of their contacts. The fraudsters will generally delete those. They've taken over an account. They've cloned an account. They've broken into an account. And the first thing they're going to do is kind of clean up that account to make it look different. So they're going to drop their followers. So anything below 20, and they say they're an HR recruiter, again, red flag. The second one is, at least on LinkedIn, I don't know the other platforms, when you see contact info or more, and you see that they have a description that looks like they have quite a number of years in experience, but they just created that profile or they just changed the profile picture in the last week or so. Again, second red flag. The third one is any kind of direct messaging, emails, DMs, etc., where they're going to talk about, you're a great profile. I've seen your profile. You're great for a project. What's your contact information? Mainly their WhatsApp. Again, not picking on WhatsApp, but that's where they're going to mainly go to. So that's a third one there. The fourth one is they do have a legitimate website, but you go to that website link, and when you get to that website link, it's generic. It's not HR recruiting. There's no job board listings. So it's got some legitimacy, but there's nothing there. And then finally, when you look at what's the role that they're talking about, and then you get their experience, they're a medical research specialist, but they're recruiting you for a construction job. So there are 5 quick, John, that pretty big ones there. On the company side, if it's an HR team listening to this call, or a CFE, fraudsters fraud examiners that work with their HR teams, on the HR side, the biggest thing there is they're going to claim that they work for your company. So again, I'm going to use LinkedIn solely as an example. There's something called associated members on your company. You need to audit that because there's going to be fraudulent recruiters on there with legitimate titles. We've seen companies, large companies, with as high as 23% of the associated personnel were fraudulent employees. Claimed to be employees, but they were fraudulent accounts.
Wow, 23%, you said?
Yes.
That's certainly not a small number.
And think like 140.
Yeah.
Not 23% of 10. Think 140 of those of this one company. Do the math. You can imagine a good sized company, but 140 in one company that I helped out, that we found 140 fraudulent profiles, all of them claiming to be recruiters.
So kind of on that same thread, Jim, when you talk about the fraud examiner's role in this and actually digging in, you mentioned at the beginning, some companies obviously are very reluctant to want to talk, to want to answer questions. Have you found any commonality in terms of like cases that you've worked? I think I think you've done over 1,000 of these like hiring application like investigations. So how have companies responded to this? What other kind of work has you, as an investigator, had to do to kind of unpack it and, you know, either verify or just have enough material to assume that this is fraud? This is fraud.
Yeah, so the indicators that I talked about and others that we'll provide in the link, the fraud examiners can easily take those and implement checks and balances, testing, automation around checking those things, again, for their own company and NHR, where their company's brand is being breached. We're calling it a brand breach because sometimes these companies, when I've talked to them, some of them very large, we get the range from never heard of this problem to it's a serious problem. Can you come help us? To yeah, we've got somebody that looks at that cyber stuff. So we've got it taken care of. Thanks for letting us know. So that's 2025, the breadth of things. I think for the fraud examiners and the folks that are even just in the fraud community, go start talking to your legal and HR team. Let's give them some education on this problem because it is a brand breach. And that's hard to talk about because we talk about breach in a classic, maybe cyber world, but that they think, well, we're not affected because we're not losing money. Yeah, but your brand's being used everywhere. And I've talked to some of these companies and they're like, whoa, wait a minute. Our brand, I mean, we've even got board of directors of one company saying they were being targeted or they got cloned as being, hey, they'll do name dropping. The fraudsters will name drop it. And they'll mention board of directors. Hey, I work with, pick the board of directors name. So talk to your companies. If you've got an HR system, an applicant system out there, there's a number of them out there. I think there's over 300, but there's some big ones out there. Go talk to the people that run those applicant tracking systems and start looking at fraud controls in those systems. We generally have never audited them. We've never looked at them for fraud because they're kind of new. 20 years ago, we didn't have those massive applicant tracking systems. Now we do. The fraudsters are using them and taking advantage of them. So you got to add that into your systems and analytics and things like that inside your companies and start to educate your lawyers and your HR teams on what to look for and education.
Like you said, it's a great point. It's an indirect form of fraud. It doesn't directly affect the company's bottom line, but majority of companies, you can go right on their website. You can replicate a logo. You can replicate, like you said, company leadership, even some of their language, their materials, and create an entire personality, like you said, in a day.
Yes, and it's again, you think, well, that our social media group manages our social media stuff like LinkedIn and Indeed. Great. You think they're fraud investigators? Probably not. So let's go educate those social media folks that are looking at great things like sentiment analysis and good comments and responding to customer servicing. Those are all good things. And we're not asking those social media folks to do fraud investigations. What we're asking them to do is go start to add this to your list of when do you contact security or the fraud team. Start giving them some indicators. You start seeing this, get a hold of us. And so those are things you need to add on to their little checklist of things to look out for. Because here's one thing that we found with one a victim company is that their sentiment analysis, which is how everybody loves that company or doesn't like that company, their sentiment analysis actually started going down in the people that were seeking jobs to work for that company. They're like, I'm not going to go work for them if they've got all this fraud going on or this, these brand issues. So now you've got people that do not want to come work for you because they see all of this fraud being used under your brand. Is that billions of dollars? No, I'm not naive to say that. But is that an impact? Absolutely.
Yeah, and obviously prevention is the best form of anti-fraud work. So I'm curious, Jim, and some of the case that you've worked consulting or directly on things like this, do you find that companies are starting to take a proactive approach in this? Even as they're doing yearly planning, looking at job growth, looking at upcoming postings, do you feel that companies are starting to recognize this as a serious problem?
It is I think it's still new in the fraud world and the brand risk world. I think it's still new. We did a little bit of a look, non-scientific, at some data that we had. And starting in about 2022, we started seeing a little bit of this, what I call testing the waters, where the fraudulents were testing it to see what this would work. And so we've all heard the um, model of the hockey stick increase. So when we started seeing that little increase, so this increase, that hockey puck shot up, we think probably around the second quarter of last year. And of course, now it is somewhat chaos. So honestly, respecting the companies, the brands, the fraud examiners out there, it wasn't really that on the radar, as we would say, until about mid last year. And now the adversarial groups, because we know there are groups out there that are doing this collectively. We know that they are finding companies that are not monitoring this process. And now you find, there was one that was a legitimate recruiting company, job placement company. And sure, they started out with a few. Well, guess what? Since they haven't managed that process, now there's hundreds of fake recruiters under their brand, and they're a very great brand. So guess what? The adversary of, why do bank robbers rob banks? It's where the money is. If I'm going to be doing recruiting things, why don't I look like working for a recruiting company? And the more and more I can get away with it. So these are smart groups that are doing this. We're not seeing a lot of one-off, one-person, two-person. We're absolutely seeing big groups, and I'm not tracking what those groups are, but you see obviously some similarities. And if your company is vulnerable, they're going to keep taking advantage of you.
Yeah, and it's certainly going to be something I think that grows over time. Obviously, as more people come online, more people are looking for work. Jay, one of the things, obviously, that the people who are affected by this, like you said, there's two possible things. Likely they're going to, if the company's going to want to get out, it's a fraudulent company. It's either money or it's more worse, their information, first identifiable stuff. So, what can job seekers do, if you realize you've been exposed, you've stumbled down this pathway and you unfortunately fall victim to one of these schemes? What are some things that they can do, or even like next steps you would recommend for them?
Sure. I think it really comes down to, it would be when you got that phone call or that credit reporting thing from some other type of kind of classic cyber breach, but now you've got some new elements to this of your job history, et cetera. And so there's, some additional things besides passwords and, credit reporting checks and stuff like that. Start to really manage your resumes better than maybe you are today. Don't just keep sending them out. Every one of my resumes that I send out when when I'm job seeking or looking for consulting and stuff like that, there's a slight difference in everyone, not just modified for the job description or the client type thing, but something as simple as the date on the file name, changing that. One of the things that I recommended to a number of folks is to watermark your resume and then PDF it, maybe PDF the password. Not that they're not going to take advantage of other methods, stuff like that, but on the resume where you kind of control that information going out, password protecting it, watermarking it, things like that. Now, I am, Jim, the applicant tool that we're applying to doesn't read those files. Okay. Again, if you're going to a legitimate site, Acme Brick Company, you know them, you don't necessarily need to do that. But if you're sending it out to a more broader audience or posting it somewhere, those are a couple of things there. On your LinkedIn, Indeed, all the different job sites that are out there, making sure you have the strongest of passwords and controls there, making sure you are limiting what you're putting out there to what you need to have out there. I don't put my CFE number out there I say I'm a proud 25-year member of the ACFE, but I don't put my number out there, for example. So limited to what really needs it, because remember, resumes and LinkedIn profiles, they're to get you an interview. They're not there to get you a job. Let me repeat that. They're there to get you an interview, not to get you a job. So what do you think you need to do to get an interview? After that, you're sitting in the desk across from a recruiter or a hiring manager, different conversation, because there's a mutual trust and respect that we're not fraudulent sitting across from each other.
I love that distinction. this is to get you the first look, not the actual job itself. I love that. Jill, I feel like we could, certainly want to catch up on this, in the coming months. And like you said, this is very new. It's certainly something I think that will continue to grow. So, for anyone listening today, wants to learn more about applicant fraud, hiring violations, I know you mentioned some resources, but anything you'd recommend them kind of reading up on and trying to, especially from the fraud examiner, things to kind of educate them and continue to look for these.
Sure. One other point that I'm sure people will ask, why aren't the platforms doing more? And I will tell you that at least on LinkedIn, because I want to give them some credit here, we have got a great connection within there, and we have provided them some very specific technical ways to start to prevent more things. But any of the other platforms that are out there, there are absolutely opportunities. And if you're a CFE on those using a CFE that works for those platforms, reach out to me and we can have that discussion. But there are some things that those platforms can detect these things. For example, LinkedIn just added something where if you're in a DM, look for a message and it'll say, this person is trying to take the conversation off the platform. That's a clue. So they just added that in the last couple of weeks, which is awesome. So that's where the platforms are starting to realize this is making their brand look better. So that's great there. From a read-up standpoint, the resources that we'll provide through a QR code, a safe QR code, at the end, they can absolutely take advantage of that. And then, there's some things that are going on LinkedIn, where there's 2 or 3 of us out there that are talking about this a lot. And so glad to help out, reach out at any time, particularly my fellow CFEs, reach out through the ACFE community group. In fact, John, one of the people that I got in contact with was going through the ACFE community and posted something about one of their senior executives. And I actually reached out to them through the ACFE community and said, glad to help. And we had an offline conversation. So great area. You can get a hold of me there. Glad to help out.
Love that, Jim. Yeah, 25 years, obviously, congratulations. Thank you for the work you've been doing. I think the work you'll continue to do. Really interesting. So like I said, I do want to follow up as this continues to grow and, we can catch up and hopefully learn a little bit more about it as you kind of talk to some more companies about this. So thank you.
Be honored. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And thank you, everybody, for listening today. You can find every episode of Fraud Talk on acfe.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen. Once again, I'm John Duffley with Jim McConnell, signing off.